Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me today. I want to tell you what happened when I went into the energy of the Bible, the King James version of the Bible. I tested the energy of 3 separate editions, as well as the Old Testament and the New Testament individually. Absolutely fascinating, and not at all what I might have expected. This came about because a viewer requested it. Please take a look at the energy of the Bible. But how? I had absolutely no idea how I would do it, so I stalled for quite a while. And then one day I was looking at a bookshelf and I came across this. The Oxford Annotated Bible from 1962. It was just sitting there, so I took it down. I put it on the table beside me and I thought, when the moment is right, I will absolutely tackle that. It waited a while. And then one day I was sitting there and I started getting really lurid images in my head, relating to nothing as far as I could tell. But I realized that I had my elbow on the Bible. And I thought, this is my cue. This is when I must do this. And so I set about going into the energy of this book, but also a couple of others as well. The Bible is a complex work. It dates back to around the 12th century BC and initially comprised the sacred writings of the Jewish people in Hebrew, the Torah, and so on. Then around the 3rd or 4th century BC, because there were Jewish communities in Greece, it was translated into Greek. But it was another 500 years, the 2nd century AD, before these Jewish scriptures were officially settled on as the Hebrew Canon Bible. Meanwhile, the Christian canon was still a work in progress. It was begun in the 1st century AD by Jesus' followers and was debated and chewed over for quite a while. It comprised the Gospels, the book of Acts, the epistles, and so on, and eventually turned into the 27 books of the New Testament that we know today. But it was still in Greek, and so in the 4th century AD, a guy called Jerome, became Saint Jerome, decided to translate the whole thing, the Old Testament, the New Testament, into Latin for a broader audience. And this was the official Bible then for around 1,000 years, until medieval times and the arrival of the Reformation movement. The Reformers wanted a version of the Bible in English, and several of them tried to translate it. But of course, they all had different views on what it should be. They interpreted it differently. There were ambiguities and conflicts. So King James VI of Scotland, actually he became King James I of England because there was a union between the two countries. It's very confusing. But King James decided to resolve all the conflicts. He hired 50 scholars to work on the Bible and produce a definitive English version, preserving the integrity and the meaning of the original texts. And that became the King James Version of the Bible, the one we still use today. Obviously, the language has modified somewhat from the medieval to make it more accessible, but essentially at its core, it is the same thing. And that's the one I used for this energy test. First of all, I wanted to tell you what happened when I tested out the energy of a couple of other Bibles. I went along to the local library to find one. And to my astonishment, our library does not stock a copy of the Bible. I was amazed. And I had to go to a bookstore. The woman on the desk downstairs said that it's not filed under Bibles, even though the bookcases are labeled Bibles. They're actually, the Bibles are somewhere else. Of course. So I've got to go and find them. Apparently, she said, just go to the Bible section and just keep going. It's past the preschool toys. The Bibles in the bookstore were on the top floor in the furthest corner next to the restrooms, which is not encouraging. But I chose two. The first one was this, the 2015 Thomas Nelson publication. I guess they publish a lot of Bibles. And when I touched it and went into the energy of it, I immediately got this image of somebody, a man, holding up a wall that was about to topple. Behind it, there were buildings, there were skyscrapers and whatever, but there was also a lot of earth, and this shifting earth was pushing the wall over. It took so much struggle and pain and effort and striving to keep it propped up. And I felt that the man should just let it go. Step aside, let the wall and the earth crumble and tumble, and then pick up the pieces afterwards. Just touching this edition of the Bible felt like the opposite of faith. Like the book was a religious tome. It had the spirit of religion through it and was probably produced in that vein, with that intention. That's faith with a capital F, the Christian faith. But at some deep level, it lacked faith with a little f. It lacked the trust that God, the universal intelligence, whatever you want to call it, will provide. That you can take your hands off the steering wheel and let the divine drive. Step aside. Put your burdens down. It felt like a lot of mortal effort was going into supporting the Word of God. And nowhere near enough effort was going into surrendering to the will of God. Yield. Trust. Have faith with a little f. Believe that you're going to be okay because God has your back. Universal forces are taking care of you. You don't need to fight. You don't need to struggle. You don't necessarily have to know all the words and the stories of the book. You just have to understand the spirit of the book and live there. Live in that flow of energy, of goodness, of love, of forgiveness and compassion. That's what that said to me when I touched that Bible. So I tried another one. This one was an illustrated one, I assume for children, but it was beautifully done. Laid out in such a clear, concise way with lovely pictures. And I touched that one to see what I got. And when I did, immediately I was standing, there was a little figure standing, in front of a sunflower, but an enormous sunflower. It towered above me. And I was beneath it. I was standing in its shadow because the sun was directly behind the sunflower. And it struck me that what was happening here was that the flower, this beautiful flower that in a way represented the sun, was not the real thing. The real thing was behind it. The inspiration for the flower, the thing that made it grow, was behind it. And to really get the benefit of the sunshine itself, rather than the product of the sunshine, I had to move out of the shadow and stand directly in sunlight. This book, beautiful, absolutely gorgeously illustrated, was a presentation, but it wasn't the real thing. You could read it front to back and really enjoy it and learn a lot about the Bible. But if you really wanted to know about the spirit of the Bible, what actually inspired it, you had to step away from the book and look beyond it, to the source of the light. So then I decided to test out the energies of the Old Testament and the New Testament respectively. In fact, I did it twice from 2 different books to see what I got. And when I went into the Old Testament to put my hand into the pages of the Old Testament chapters, it was like somebody had my fingers, my middle 3 fingers actually, and was squeezing them really, really hard, to the point where I thought they would break. That was the Old Testament energy, inflicting pain or retribution, some kind of restriction that felt uncomfortable and unnatural. So I then touched the pages of the New Testament, and it was like somebody was swabbing my fingers now. Somebody had a cotton wool ball and was swabbing my fingers down with either oil or water, something gentle, something warm. Very much a comforting, there you go, you'll be okay feeling. These two sections of the same book were wildly different. First one, strict, tough, punishing. The other one, balmy, comforting. Put its arm around your shoulder and offer you solace kind of energy. So I then got another version of the Bible, and I did the same thing again. I put my hand in the Old Testament, and this time somebody was hitting my fingers. I don't know why it's about hands, actually, but it was both times. Somebody was hitting my fingers to the point where they were getting red and swollen. Again, really, really painful and almost cruel. And then when I touched the New Testament, it's like I dipped my hand into a brook, a softly, coolly flowing brook. So that, according to the pictures, is the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. One's negative, one's positive. One's about punishment, retribution, and is even cruel in places. And the other one, the New Testament, is about mercy and forgiveness and compassion and kindness, which would be very much in line with Jesus' teachings. That's how it was written. That's the spirit that runs through it. Which brings me, of course, to the Bible I did originally. So the first image I got was of a person, a little figure, lying on a table with its insides exposed. And I felt like recoiling from this. This is not the kind of thing I wanted to see at all, and I didn't know why I would be shown such a thing. Even more strangely, I, in the pictures, climbed into the incision and lay down on the inside of this body. And then it closed above me. And I panicked. It felt claustrophobic. Why was I in there? Why could I not get out? I struggled. But I realized that the figure on the table represents the book. And I struggle with the book. Not the spirit of it, but I struggle with the idea of faith with a capital F. Religion. Organized religion and doctrine and whatever. I struggle with that because I think that faith with a little f is more important. If you have faith with a little f, you trust and you surrender, you don't really need faith with a big F. And so I struggled. And I thought, maybe this isn't God's word, this is man's word. All these people who've worked on this book over the centuries, the millennia, who've added their little bit, they've all chipped in, and that's the product. It's just a book. It's man's word. But as I lay there, uncomfortable and struggling and slightly asphyxiated by the situation, it was like a sluice opened and I was flushed away down a tunnel into a cavity of some kind. It wasn't a cave or anything. It was more like a womb, actually. It was more like a womb. And as I stood in that energy, I could hear a noise. Maybe like a baby does in a womb. A baby hears noises, but I could hear noises. But this was a grinding noise, a perpetual grinding noise, like being in a factory and somewhere the generator is going. And I could hear it, but I couldn't see what the cause was. I was just in my little womb. And it struck me that this was a metaphor for our reality. That universal forces, God, Spirit, whatever else, they're there. We can't see them. They're operating at a different dimension, a different frequency, but they're there. The workings of the universe, the workings of God, it's all going on around us unseen. And we can either choose to struggle and fight and feel powerless and small, or we can go about our lives confident, having faith with a little f, confident that God is at work all the time, guarding, guiding, protecting, and that we're fine. All we have to do is stop trying to hold up the wall, stop struggling and striving and fighting. Surrender and yield and trust. We can't control that. We can just do our part with faith and understand that whatever is going on that we can't see is benevolent. It's for our benefit, even at times when it doesn't seem like it is. Once we understand that the unseen, this mighty, expansive, unconscious field all around us is working for our benefit, then all we have to do is step out of the shadow of the sunflower into the light and feel the full force of the sun bathing us, of Spirit bathing us, of God bathing us. I came away from this fully convinced now, where I wasn't before at all, that the Bible, while containing enormous wisdom and words of comfort, was simply a book. Take it or leave it, read it or don't. But it was also a conduit to the truth. The people who wrote it, who translated it, who compiled it, they were inspired. They tapped into the great unknown, the unseen forces. You don't need the book to access that unconscious field. It's there. It's yours. It's your birthright. But if it helps you get there, that's fantastic. But I have a different view of the Bible now. I see it as a way of accessing what's true, not as containing the truth. But you can access the truth in other ways too. Little f faith versus capital F faith. It is a choice. Stand in the shadow of the sunflower or stand in the sunlight. It's a choice. And that's what I learned from testing the energies of these Bibles. Alrighty, that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, as ever. And I'll see you very soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.